Imagine this. You're the person everyone calls when they need a favor. Your coworker dumps their urgent project on your desk 5 minutes before you're supposed to leave for a weekend getaway. Your friend consistently shows up an hour late to every dinner you've planned, knowing you'll wait. Your family member borrows money they never intend to return because they know you're too kind to ask for it back. And somehow, despite being the most generous and caring person in every room, you're the one who ends up feeling exhausted, unappreciated, and oddly guilty for even thinking these thoughts. Here's the uncomfortable truth that psychology research has uncovered: the very qualities that make you a beautiful human being, your empathy, your generosity, your desire to maintain harmony, are the exact same qualities that make you a target for exploitation. But this isn't your fault, and it's certainly not a character flaw. It's the result of a psychological pattern so deeply ingrained that most kind people don't even realize they're trapped in it. The question that will change your entire perspective is this: what if your kindness isn't actually serving you or the people around you? What if the very thing you believe makes you a good person is actually enabling bad behavior in others while slowly destroying your sense of self-worth? This isn't about becoming cold or selfish. This is about understanding why psychological research shows that genuinely kind people often struggle more with depression, anxiety, and burnout than their more assertive counterparts. It's about recognizing that there's a hidden mechanism at work, one that transforms your greatest strength into your most vulnerable weakness. Most people assume that kindness equals goodness, but psychology reveals something far more complex. When researchers studied the behavioral patterns of self-identified kind people, they discovered a disturbing correlation. The kinder someone believes themselves to be, the more likely they are to report feeling taken advantage of, emotionally drained and secretly resentful of the very people they're trying to help. Think about the last time you said yes, when every fiber of your being wanted to say no. What was really happening in that moment? You weren't just being nice. You were participating in a psychological dance that had nothing to do with genuine kindness and everything to do with fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being seen as selfish, fear of abandonment. Your brain was making split-second calculations, determining that sacrificing your own needs was safer than risking someone's disapproval. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. The people who take advantage of kind individuals aren't necessarily malicious. They're often operating from their own psychological patterns, unconsciously seeking out people who won't set boundaries, who won't push back, who will absorb their emotional and practical burdens without complaint. It's a perfect storm of psychological compatibility that creates relationships where one person gives until they're empty, while the other takes until there's nothing left. The most heartbreaking part? Truly kind people often blame themselves for these dynamics. They think they're not giving enough, not being understanding enough, not trying hard enough to meet everyone's needs. They've been conditioned to believe that their worth is directly tied to how much they can sacrifice for others, creating a vicious cycle where the more they give, the less they receive, yet the more obligated they feel to keep giving. Before we dive deeper into this psychological labyrinth, I want you to do something radical. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like your kindness was being weaponized against you, and subscribe because we're about to uncover the hidden psychology that's been shaping your relationships, your entire life. This isn't just about understanding why kind people get taken advantage of. It's about learning how to maintain your beautiful, generous heart while protecting yourself from those who would exploit it. The roots of this exploitation pattern run far deeper than most people realize, stemming from a fundamental misunderstanding of what genuine kindness actually means. Psychologist Carl Jung identified this phenomenon decades ago when he observed that individuals who over-identify with their nice persona often suppress their shadow side, the part of them capable of setting boundaries, expressing anger, and protecting their own interests. Jung understood that when we disown these supposedly negative aspects of ourselves, we become psychologically incomplete. We develop what he called a pleasing mask that we wear to gain acceptance and avoid rejection. But this mask becomes a prison, trapping us in patterns of behavior that serve everyone except ourselves. The irony is profound. In our desperate attempt to be loved, we often become doormats for the very people whose love we're seeking. Dr. Aaron Beck, the founder of cognitive behavioral therapy, identified this pattern as sociotropy, a personality trait characterized by excessive concern for maintaining positive relationships and an intense fear of criticism or rejection. People high in sociotropy, Beck discovered, are significantly more prone to depression because they consistently sacrifice their own needs and desires to avoid any possibility of interpersonal conflict. But the problem goes even deeper than individual psychology. Philosopher and psychiatrist Viktor Frankl observed that when people derive their sense of meaning and purpose solely from serving others, they become vulnerable to what he called existential vacuum, a profound emptiness that occurs when their identity becomes entirely dependent on external validation. These individuals lose touch with their own inner compass, their own desires, their own sense of what matters to them personally. Consider the neurological dimension. Recent brain imaging studies have shown that people with strong people-pleasing tendencies have hyperactive mirror neuron systems. These are the brain cells that help us empathize with others by literally mirroring their emotional states in our own neural pathways. While this enhanced empathy seems like a gift, it becomes a curse when it's not balanced with strong neural pathways for self-protection and boundary setting. Dr. Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive people reveals another crucial piece of this puzzle. Approximately 20% of the population has a nervous system that processes sensory information more deeply, including social and emotional cues. These individuals are often naturally more attuned to others' needs and emotions, making them exceptionally caring and thoughtful. However, this same sensitivity makes them more susceptible to emotional overwhelm and more likely to prioritize others' comfort over their own well-being. The psychological term fawning has gained recognition as a trauma response alongside the more familiar fight, flight, and freeze responses. People who have experienced childhood emotional neglect or inconsistent caregiving often develop fawning as a survival strategy. They learn that keeping others happy is the key to safety and acceptance. This response becomes so automatic that they continue fawning long after the original threat has passed, often well into adulthood and in relationships where such self-sacrifice is unnecessary and even harmful. Attachment theory provides another lens through which to understand this pattern. Individuals with anxious attachment styles, often developed in early childhood relationships with inconsistent or emotionally unavailable caregivers, grow up believing that love is conditional. They internalize the message that they must earn affection through perfect behavior, constant giving, and never being a burden. This creates adults who are terrified of setting boundaries because they unconsciously believe that any assertion of their own needs will result in abandonment. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote extensively about the human tendency toward compassion, but he also warned against what he called pathological sympathy, empathy that becomes so overwhelming that it destroys the individual's capacity for rational self-interest. Schopenhauer understood that healthy relationships require a balance between caring for others and maintaining one's own psychological integrity. The cultural dimension cannot be ignored either. Many societies, particularly those with strong collectivist values, teach children that self-sacrifice is the highest virtue. While there's beauty in considering the needs of the community, problems arise when individuals are taught that their own needs are inherently selfish or unworthy of consideration. This creates adults who feel guilty for having basic human needs and who see any act of self-care as morally questionable. What makes this pattern particularly insidious is that it often masquerades as virtue. Our society celebrates self-sacrifice and treats boundary setting as selfishness. This cultural messaging reinforces the very psychological patterns that leave kind people vulnerable to exploitation, creating a perfect storm where the healthiest psychological behavior, maintaining balanced relationships, is labeled as wrong. The toll this pattern takes on genuinely kind people extends far beyond simple frustration or occasional disappointment. What most people don't realize is that chronic people-pleasing fundamentally rewires the brain in ways that make authentic self-expression increasingly difficult and genuine connection nearly impossible. Neuroscientists have discovered that when we consistently suppress our own needs and desires, the neural pathways associated with self-awareness begin to atrophy. Dr. Dan Siegel's research on neuroplasticity shows that the brain regions responsible for interoception, our ability to sense our own internal states, emotions, and needs, become less active when we're constantly focused on reading and responding to others' emotional states. Over time, people pleasers literally lose touch with their own inner compass. This neurological shift has profound psychological consequences. Many chronic people pleasers report feeling like they don't know who they really are anymore. They've become so skilled at shape-shifting to meet others' expectations that they've lost contact with their authentic self. They can tell you exactly what everyone else needs, wants, and feels, but if you ask them what they want for dinner, they're genuinely stumped. The emotional consequences are equally devastating. Dr. Brené Brown's research on shame reveals that people pleasers often develop what she calls performative kindness, behavior that looks generous on the surface but is actually driven by fear and shame. This creates a painful internal contradiction. The very people who appear most selfless are often consumed by secret feelings of resentment, anger, and self-betrayal. Consider the relationship dynamics that emerge from this pattern. When one person consistently prioritizes everyone else's needs, they unconsciously train others to expect this level of sacrifice. Family members learn that this person will always say yes, friends come to rely on their unlimited emotional availability, and romantic partners may become entitled to their constant accommodation. The kind person becomes trapped in relationships where their value is measured entirely by what they can provide for others. Perhaps most tragically, this pattern often prevents the formation of truly intimate connections. Real intimacy requires mutual vulnerability, honest communication, and the courage to show up authentically, even when that authenticity might disappoint others. People pleasers, terrified of revealing any aspect of themselves that might be rejected, instead present a carefully curated version of themselves that they believe others will find acceptable. But you can't feel truly loved when the person loving you doesn't actually know who you are. The physical health consequences are equally serious. Chronic stress from constantly suppressing one's own needs and managing others' emotions takes a severe toll on the body. Research published in the Journal of Behavioral Medicine found that people with high people-pleasing tendencies show elevated cortisol levels, compromised immune function, and higher rates of cardiovascular disease. Their bodies are literally paying the price for their psychological pattern of self-sacrifice. Dr. Gabor Mate's work on the connection between emotional suppression and physical illness reveals that people who consistently prioritize others' comfort over their own authenticity are at higher risk for autoimmune disorders, chronic fatigue, and even certain types of cancer. The body, it seems, rebels against the constant internal conflict between what we need and what we believe we should give. There's also a darker psychological consequence that few people recognize. Chronic people-pleasing often breeds unconscious manipulation. When someone is desperate for approval and terrified of rejection, they may begin using their kindness as a strategy to control others' responses to them. They give not from a place of genuine generosity, but from a calculated attempt to ensure they'll be seen as indispensable and therefore safe from abandonment. This creates relationships built on unspoken contracts. I'll meet all your needs, and in return you'll never leave me or be angry with me. But these contracts are one-sided and unsustainable. When others inevitably fail to hold up their end of this unspoken bargain, when they don't appreciate the sacrifice enough, when they don't reciprocate the level of care, when they dare to have needs that conflict with the people-pleaser's offerings, the resentment becomes toxic. The saddest irony is that chronic people-pleasers often attract the very people who are least capable of genuine appreciation or reciprocal care. Healthy, emotionally mature individuals want balanced relationships with mutual give and take. They're often uncomfortable being in relationships where someone is constantly sacrificing themselves because they recognize the unsustainability and emotional manipulation inherent in such dynamics. Instead, People pleasers often find themselves surrounded by individuals who are more than happy to receive endless care without reciprocating. Narcissists, emotional vampires, and people who have learned that others will always pick up their slack. The kind person's generosity becomes an enabler of others' dysfunction, creating a cycle where their giving actually prevents growth and maturity in the people they're trying to help. The path to liberation from this psychological trap requires a fundamental shift in how you understand kindness itself. True kindness, genuine compassion, isn't about endless self-sacrifice. It's about creating relationships where everyone, including yourself, can thrive. This means learning to distinguish between healthy giving and compulsive people-pleasing. The first revolutionary step is developing what psychologists call differentiation, the ability to maintain your sense of self while staying emotionally connected to others. Dr. Murray Bowen's family systems theory shows us that the healthiest people are those who can care deeply about others without losing themselves in the process. This isn't selfishness. It's emotional maturity. Start by implementing what I call the pause protocol. When someone makes a request of you, instead of automatically saying yes, pause and ask yourself 3 crucial questions. What do I actually want to do in this situation? Am I saying yes from genuine desire to help or from fear of disappointing this person? And what would I do if I knew this person would still care about me regardless of my answer? This pause allows your authentic self to emerge before your people-pleasing programming kicks in. You might be surprised to discover that you actually want to help in many situations, but you also want to decline in others, and both responses are equally valid. Boundary setting becomes a radical act of self-respect. But here's the key insight most people miss. Boundaries aren't walls that keep people out. They're gates that allow healthy connection while preventing exploitation. When you set a boundary, you're not being mean. You're creating the conditions for genuine relationship. Practice what Dr. Henry Cloud calls the gift of limits. When you consistently say yes to everything, you rob others of the opportunity to develop their own problem-solving skills, resilience, and respect for limits. Your endless availability actually stunts the emotional growth of the people around you. By setting boundaries, you're giving them the gift of learning to manage their own lives. Learn to recognize and interrupt the internal dialogue that drives people-pleasing behavior. Notice thoughts like, if I don't help them, no one will. I should be able to handle this, or it's easier if I just do it myself. These thoughts aren't facts. They're fear-based assumptions that keep you trapped in caretaking patterns. Replace these thoughts with more accurate ones. Other people are capable of solving their own problems. My worth isn't determined by how much I sacrifice, and healthy relationships involve mutual care and respect. This cognitive restructuring takes practice, but it literally rewires your brain to support healthier relationship patterns. Perhaps most importantly, you must learn to tolerate others' disappointment without viewing it as a crisis that requires your immediate intervention. People pleasers have been trained to see others' negative emotions as emergencies that they must fix. But disappointment, frustration, and even anger are normal human emotions that people need to learn to manage themselves. When someone is upset that you've set a boundary, resist the urge to backtrack or over-explain. Their emotional response is information about their own expectations and patterns, not evidence that you've done something wrong. A simple, I understand you're disappointed and I care about you, but this is what works for me, is sufficient. Cultivate relationships with people who actually want your well-being, not just your services. Healthy people will appreciate your boundaries because they recognize that sustainable relationships require mutual respect. If someone consistently pushes against your limits or makes you feel guilty for having needs, this is crucial information about their character and their capacity for genuine relationship. The ultimate rebellion against people-pleasing is learning to value your own emotional and physical well-being as much as you value others. This isn't selfish. It's the foundation upon which all healthy relationships are built. When you model self-respect, you give others permission to do the same, creating a culture of mutual care rather than one-sided sacrifice. Here's the truth that will change everything. The people who truly love you don't want you to sacrifice yourself for them. Let that sink in for a moment. The individuals who genuinely care about your well-being are actually uncomfortable when you consistently put their needs before your own. They want to be in relationship with the real you, not with a carefully constructed persona designed to keep them happy. This revelation exposes the fundamental lie that drives people-pleasing behavior, the belief that your worth is conditional on your ability to make others happy. But love, real, genuine love, isn't transactional. It doesn't operate on a system where you must earn care through perfect behavior and endless giving. When someone truly values you, they want you to have boundaries, to express your authentic feelings, and to take care of yourself. The most profound shift happens when you realize that your people-pleasing patterns haven't been protecting your relationships, they've been preventing them. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you suppress your authentic response to keep someone comfortable, every time you sacrifice your own needs to avoid conflict, you're creating distance between yourself and the people you care about. You're teaching them to love a version of you that doesn't actually exist. Carl Jung understood this when he wrote about the importance of psychological integration. He believed that true individuation, becoming who you really are, requires us to reclaim all the parts of ourselves we've disowned in order to be acceptable. This includes your right to say no, your capacity for healthy anger, your need for rest and care, and your desire to be valued for who you are rather than what you can provide. When you begin setting boundaries and expressing your authentic self, something magical happens in your relationships. The people who are only connected to you for what you could give them begin to fade away. This can be temporarily painful, but it's actually a gift. You're making space for people who want to know and love the real you. Meanwhile, the relationships that remain begin to deepen in ways you never thought possible. When you stop managing everyone else's emotions, they get the opportunity to develop their own emotional resilience. When you stop solving everyone else's problems, they discover their own strength and resourcefulness. When you start showing up authentically, you give others permission to do the same. The ultimate truth about kindness is this: it must include kindness to yourself. Compassion that excludes the compassionate one isn't sustainable. It's a form of emotional self-harm disguised as virtue. True kindness creates a world where everyone's needs matter, where care flows in multiple directions, where people take responsibility for their own lives while still supporting each other. Your sensitivity, your empathy, your desire to help others, these are beautiful gifts, but they become toxic when they're not balanced with self-respect, boundaries, and authentic self-expression. The goal isn't to become less caring, it's to become more discerning about where and how you direct your care. As you implement these changes, remember that you're not just healing your own life, you're contributing to a cultural shift toward healthier relationship patterns. Every time you set a boundary, you're teaching someone else that boundaries are normal and necessary. Every time you express an authentic need, you're modeling that all humans deserve care and consideration. If this message resonated with you, I encourage you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is help another person recognize their own worth. And remember to subscribe for more insights into the psychology that shapes our lives, because understanding yourself is the first step toward creating the relationships and life you actually want.